1. This happened about 2 years ago when I was living in a small town on the outskirts of a city. The place was known for its quiet atmosphere, and while it wasn't exactly an eerie town, it had that older, Gothic feel, with cobbled streets and houses that were decades old. It wasn't unusual to hear strange stories here. Most of them were about the older, abandoned buildings around town. But there was one particular incident that stood out, something I can't shake even today. I was heading home one night after a late shift at the diner, just a little after midnight. I always took the shortcut through a narrow alley to save time, even though the alley gave me the creeps. It was dark and poorly lit, the buildings on either side towering over you like looming giants. I always had this feeling that something was watching me, but that night was different. There was a coldness to the air, sharper than usual, and the usual noise of the town felt muffled, almost too quiet. As I was halfway through the alley, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, but no one was there. I told myself it was just my imagination, but my heart was racing now. The footsteps continued, though, slow, deliberate steps, as if someone was following me, but when I turned around again, no one was there. That's when I heard the whisper. "Leave the alley now." It wasn't like a voice in my head. It was a real whisper coming from just ahead of me. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place. My eyes darted around, and that's when I saw it. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the alley. At first, I thought it was someone from town, but something was off. It was tall, impossibly tall, with skin so pale it almost shimmered in the darkness. Its eyes were glowing a strange reddish hue, and its lips were cracked in a wicked smile. But what terrified me the most was the way it was standing, like it was watching me, sizing me up, almost hungry. "Come closer," the figure said, its voice low and almost seductive. I turned and bolted, my heart hammering in my chest as I ran as fast as I could down the alley. But the figure was quick. It was behind me, so close now that I could hear its breath. It was cold, and it smelled like metal, like blood. I could feel the temperature around me drop. I stumbled, my feet slipping on the wet ground. I glanced back and saw it just standing there, not moving, but watching me with those glowing eyes. The smile on its face stretched wider. "Don't run. It's already too late for you," it hissed. With all the energy I had left, I sprinted out of the alley and onto the main road. As I reached the open streetlights, the figure disappeared into the shadows. The coldness faded. The silence was broken. I collapsed onto the curb, breathing heavily, too afraid to move, but I didn't dare look back. The next morning, I went to the police to report what happened, but they just brushed it off. No one had seen anything. No one even knew who or what I was talking about. The alley had always been a spot for strange rumors, but no one had experienced anything like that before. At least, not that I knew of. Weeks went by, and I tried to forget it. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. Every night, as I walked past that alley, I would catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows. And every time, I would hear that voice whisper, "Leave the alley. Leave before it's too late." It still haunts me to this day. The vampire, or whatever it was real, and it's still out there waiting for its next victim. I haven't walked through that alley since that night, and I don't plan to. There's something about it that feels wrong now. I can still feel its presence even when I'm miles away. Story 2. This story takes place in a small town, not far from a dense forest. I was living there for a while, staying at a friend's house because I was going through a tough time. The house was a beautiful old building, but it had always given me an uneasy feeling. It was large and creaky, with long hallways and dark rooms that I tried to avoid. But one night, everything changed. I remember it was a cold autumn evening. The air outside felt crisp, and the wind howled through the trees. My friend, Sarah, had gone out with some of her other friends for the night, leaving me alone in the house. I decided to take a relaxing bath and unwind in the old bathroom upstairs. The bathroom had an antique mirror that was framed in dark wood. Nothing special, but it always seemed like it was watching me when I looked into it. I thought I was just being paranoid. As I soaked in the tub, I felt a sudden chill. It was like the temperature had dropped drastically and it felt unnatural. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just the bath water cooling down, but the coldness lingered. Out of nowhere, I heard a soft scraping sound coming from the mirror. At first, I thought it was the wind outside, but then the sound grew louder. It was like someone was scratching on the glass, faint but distinct. I got out of the tub and approached the mirror, my breath fogging up the surface as I stared at my own reflection. But something wasn't right. The reflection of me in the mirror was wrong. My eyes were darker, the expression on my face twisted, almost as if someone else was looking back at me. My own reflection seemed to be smiling, a slow, unnatural grin that stretched too wide. It was as if it wasn't me at all. I stepped back, my heart pounding. But the reflection in the mirror stayed. It smiled at me, its eyes glowing a deep red. It was as if it was mocking me, daring me to come closer. Terrified, I turned to leave the bathroom, but as I did, the mirror seemed to pull at me. I felt a strange tug, like something invisible was reaching out to grab me. I looked back, and that's when I saw it. Behind my reflection, something moved. A figure, tall and thin, was standing just behind me, hidden in the shadows. I didn't know what to do. The figure stepped closer, its presence so overwhelming that I couldn't breathe. I could see it now, clearly in the reflection. Its face pale, its lips darkened with blood, and its eyes glowing a terrifying red. "Come closer," the figure whispered. Its voice a low hiss. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The reflection of myself turned and started walking toward the mirror. I was frozen in fear, unable to move or speak, as the reflection in the mirror became more and more distorted. The figure behind me in the reflection was now in the mirror, reaching out its hand toward me. I stumbled backward, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. The figure in the mirror smiled, and in that moment, I realized it wasn't just an illusion. It was something alive, something that wanted me. Finally, I snapped out of my trance and ran out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. I could hear the figure's laugh echoing through the house, low and sinister. I ran to the front door, but before I could leave, I glanced back at the bathroom. The door to the bathroom was open, and I could see the mirror again. Just a normal mirror now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. When Sarah came home later that night, I didn't say anything, but I could see the look in her eyes when she passed by the bathroom. It was the same look I had seen on her face when I first moved in. Fear, like she knew something I didn't. She wouldn't talk about it, but there was one thing she told me before I left. Don't look in the mirror at night, not ever. Story 3. It all started when my friends and I decided to go on a weekend road trip to an old, abandoned mansion we had heard about from a local. The mansion was located at the edge of a small town, and it had been empty for years. Most people around there claimed it was haunted, but no one dared go near it. But we were curious, reckless, and eager for adventure, so we set off to explore. When we arrived, the mansion looked exactly like you'd expect, huge, decaying, and surrounded by a dark forest. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and rotting wood. As soon as we stepped inside, the temperature dropped. It was the kind of cold that made your bones ache, even though it was a warm day outside. We split into pairs and started exploring. I was with my best friend Sam, and we made our way up to the second floor, passing through dusty rooms with broken furniture and shattered windows. We were laughing and joking, not taking things seriously, when we found a large, ornate door at the end of a hallway. It was different from the rest of the doors, heavier with intricate carvings, and the handle was made of silver. Naturally, we tried to open it. It was locked, but the door creaked slightly when we pushed on it. There was a strange sense of tension in the air, but we didn't think much of it. We decided to leave it alone, but something in the back of my mind kept telling me that we shouldn't be there. Later that night, after exploring more of the house and finding strange, dusty old portraits of families I didn't recognize, we decided to set up camp in one of the large, empty rooms on the first floor. The atmosphere was unsettling, but we were too excited to let it ruin our trip. We had brought food, sleeping bags, and flashlights to make it feel less eerie. Around midnight, as we were sitting around telling stories, we heard it, the sound of footsteps. At first, we thought it was one of our friends coming downstairs, but when we called out, there was no response. The footsteps kept getting louder, coming closer, but when we turned the flashlight toward the staircase, there was no one there. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted, and we could see our breath in the air. We all froze, staring at each other, but no one spoke. Then we heard the sound again, but this time it was different. It was dragging, like someone's feet were scraping along the floor. I was the first one to get up, nervously clutching my flashlight. I walked toward the source of the sound, creeping down the hall to the stairs. As I reached the bottom, I saw something move in the shadows, something tall and gaunt, moving with unnatural speed. Before I could react, it appeared right in front of me. I froze, unable to scream. It was a man, or something that used to be a man, tall, with pale, almost translucent skin. His eyes were dark, but there was something glowing in them, something that made my skin crawl. His teeth, sharp and elongated, glistened in the dim light. I didn't even have time to think before he lunged at me. The air around me seemed to go cold, and I could feel his breath on my neck as I backed away, heart racing. I shouted for Sam, but the vampire, because that's what I now believe it was, grabbed me with surprising strength, dragging me toward the stairs. I fought back with everything I had, kicking and punching, but it was no use. Then, out of nowhere, Sam appeared, wielding a rusty old metal rod. He swung it at the creature, hitting it square in the chest. The vampire staggered back, hissing in pain, but didn't fall. "Run!" Sam screamed, and we both bolted out of the mansion, not looking back. We didn't stop until we reached the town. Our hearts were pounding, and we could hear our ragged breath as we rushed to the nearest gas station to call for help. But when we went back to the mansion the next day, it was completely gone. Just an empty plot of land, like nothing had ever been there. We never spoke about what happened again, but I've never forgotten that creature, the cold air, or the hunger in its eyes. I know it was a vampire. There's no other explanation. And every so often I still hear that dragging sound when I'm alone. And I know deep down that whatever it was is still out there waiting,